The clock on the wall showed 9:30 when Rosa finished mopping the last corner of the grand recital hall. Her back ached the way it always did after 6 hours of pushing a cart through endless hallways. She stretched slowly, pressing her hand against her lower spine, and looked around the empty room. This was her favorite part of the night. When everyone was gone. When the lights were dimmed. When she could breathe. The Hartwell Conservatory of Music was one of the most famous music schools in all of Boston. Rich families sent their children here from all over the country. Famous musicians came to teach. The building itself looked like something from an old movie, with high ceilings and wooden floors that had been walked on by legends, and Rosa cleaned it. Every single night. She had been doing this job for 12 years now. 12 years of sweeping, mopping, dusting, and emptying trash cans. 12 years of watching young students walk past her without even glancing in her direction. 12 years of hearing beautiful music through closed doors while she scrubbed toilets and wiped down mirrors. At 53 years old, Rosa had accepted that this was her life now. She wore the same faded blue uniform every shift. Her hands were rough from cleaning chemicals. Her hair, once thick and black, was now streaked with gray, and always tied back in a simple bun. To the people who filled these halls during the day, she was invisible. Just another cleaning lady. Just part of the background, like the paintings on the walls, or the plants in the corners. Nobody ever asked her name. Nobody ever wondered about her story. And that was probably for the best. Rosa walked slowly toward the stage at the front of the hall. There, under the soft glow of a single light that had been left on, sat the piano. A beautiful Steinway grand piano, worth more money than Rosa would make in 10 lifetimes. She approached it carefully, the way someone might approach a sleeping animal. Her job was to dust it, to polish its black surface until it shone like glass. She had done this thousands of times, but tonight, like every night, she let her fingers hover just above the keys, not touching, never touching, just feeling the cool air between her skin and the ivory. If anyone had been watching, they might have noticed something strange. The way her fingers curved naturally into position. The way her wrist relaxed at exactly the right angle. The way her whole body seemed to remember something her mind had tried to forget. But nobody was watching. Nobody ever was. Rosa pulled her hand back and reached for her polishing cloth instead. What the students and teachers at Hartwell did not know, what nobody in America knew, was that Rosa had not always been a cleaning lady. There was a time, many years ago and many miles away, when she had been someone else entirely. She was born in Havana, Cuba, in a small apartment filled with music. Her father was a concert pianist, one of the best in the country. He played at the National Theater. He performed for presidents and ambassadors. His fingers could make a piano sing in ways that made grown men cry. And from the moment Rosa could walk, she followed him everywhere. She would sit under the piano while he practiced, feeling the vibrations move through the wooden floor and into her small body. By the time she was 4, she was picking out melodies by ear. By 6, she was reading sheet music. By 10, she was performing in front of audiences that gave her standing ovations. Everyone said she was a gift, a miracle. Her father's talent, passed down, and somehow made even brighter. At 16, Rosa was accepted into the National Conservatory of Havana, the most important music school in the country. She studied under Maestro Alejandro Reyes, a legendary teacher who had trained some of the greatest pianists in Latin America. He was strict and demanding, and he rarely gave compliments. But one day, after Rosa played a piece by Chopin that left the room in stunned silence, he put his hand on her shoulder and said, "You have something that cannot be taught. Protect it." Rosa thought her future was certain. She would become a concert pianist like her father. She would travel the world. She would play in the greatest halls on earth. But life does not care about our plans. The political situation in Cuba grew worse. Her father, who had never been interested in politics, made the mistake of speaking honestly to a foreign journalist. Within weeks, everything changed. Their family was watched, threatened. Her father lost his position at the theater. One night, Rosa's mother woke her up in the darkness. "We have to leave," she whispered. Now, they fled with nothing. No money, no clothes, No photographs, no music. Rosa was 21 years old when she arrived in Miami with her parents. Her mother found work cleaning hotels. Her father, heartbroken and lost without his music, grew sick. He died 2 years later, never having touched a piano again. Rosa tried to continue her music at first. She found a church with a piano and played when it was empty. But something had broken inside her. Every note reminded her of her father. Every melody brought back the life she had lost. So she stopped. She packed away that part of herself the way you might pack away old letters in a box. She sealed it up and put it somewhere deep and dark where she would not have to look at it. She got married to a kind man who worked in construction. They moved to Boston for his job. They had a small apartment in a neighborhood where nobody asked too many questions. When her husband passed away from a sudden heart attack 8 years ago, Rosa was left alone. She needed work. She found the job at Hartwell. The cruelty of it was not lost on her. Cleaning the floors of a music conservatory, polishing pianos she could play better than most of the students who sat at them, listening to lessons through walls and hearing mistakes she could have corrected in seconds. But she never said a word. She never let on. What would be the point? She was too old now. Too tired. The world had moved on, and her moment had passed. Or, so she told herself. Some nights, when she was completely sure nobody was around, she would sit at one of the practice room pianos and just rest her hands on the keys, not playing, just remembering, feeling the weight of all those years pressing down on her chest. The students who rolled their eyes when they saw her coming never knew they were looking at someone who had once made audiences weep with joy. The professors who walked past her without a word never suspected that she could hear every flaw in their students' playing. And Rosa never told them. Why would she? She was nobody now. Just a cleaning lady in a faded blue uniform. Invisible to everyone. She finished polishing the Steinway and stepped back to check her work. The surface gleamed under the dim light. Perfect and untouched. Tomorrow night, there would be a big event at the conservatory. The annual winter gala. The hall would be filled with wealthy donors and important guests. Students would perform. Everyone would dress up and pretend to be cultured. Rosa would be there too, of course. Serving food, cleaning up spills, staying in the background where she belonged. She had no idea that tomorrow night would change everything. That a cruel joke from a thoughtless young man would crack open the box she had kept sealed for 30 years. That the music she had buried so deep would finally find its way back to the surface. But that is the thing about destiny. It does not wait for you to be ready. Rosa turned off the last light and walked out of the hall, her footsteps echoing in the darkness behind her. The night of the winter gala arrived with a cold wind that cut through the streets of Boston. Snow had been falling since morning, covering the city in a blanket of white that made everything look clean and perfect. Inside the Hartwell Conservatory, nothing was left to chance. Crystal chandeliers sparkled overhead. Fresh flowers filled every corner. The grand recital hall had been transformed into a wonderland of elegance, with round tables draped in white cloth and candles flickering on every surface. Rosa had been working since 4 in the afternoon. She helped set up chairs. She polished silverware. She made sure every glass was spotless and every napkin was folded just right. Her supervisor, a nervous woman who constantly checked her clipboard, barked orders at the cleaning staff without ever saying please or thank you. By 7 o'clock, the guests began to arrive. They came in expensive cars that pulled up to the front entrance. Women in long gowns and men in dark suits stepped out into the cold and hurried inside, where warmth and music and the smell of fine food welcomed them. Rosa watched from the edge of the room, holding a tray of champagne glasses. Her job now was to walk among the guests and offer drinks, to smile politely, to be helpful but invisible. She had done this many times before. She knew how to move through a crowd without being noticed, how to keep her eyes down, how to disappear even while standing in plain sight. The guests barely looked at her. When they took a glass from her tray, their eyes stayed fixed on whoever they were talking to. She was just a hand holding a tray. Nothing more. The students who attended Hartwell were also there, dressed up and looking proud. These were the children of wealthy families, young people who had never known struggle or hardship. They laughed loudly and talked about summer vacations in Europe and the new cars their parents had promised them. One group in particular stood near the piano at the front of the hall. There were 4 of them, 3 young men and 1 young woman, all in their early 20s. They were the children of the conservatory's biggest donors, which meant they were treated like royalty by everyone. The leader of the group was a tall young man with slicked back hair and a smile that never quite reached his eyes. His father had donated enough money to have a practice wing named after their family. This made the young man believe he could do whatever he wanted without consequences. And tonight, he was bored. The performances had not started yet. The guests were still mingling and making small talk. The young man looked around the room for something to entertain himself. That was when he noticed Rosa. She was adjusting the piano bench, making sure it was positioned correctly for the students who would perform later. It was a small task, something she did without thinking, but to the young man, it was an opportunity. He nudged his friends and nodded toward the cleaning lady in the faded uniform. "Watch this," he said quietly. "This is going to be funny." He walked toward the piano with his friends following behind. Other guests noticed and turned to watch, curious about what was happening. Rosa looked up and saw them approaching. Something in her stomach tightened. She knew that look. She had seen it before, many times, in the eyes of people who saw her as less than human. "Hey," the young man called out, loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. "You're the cleaning lady, right? The one who's always touching this piano?" Rosa straightened up slowly. "I clean it, sir. That is my job." Right. He grinned at his friends. "You must really love this piano. You're always around it." A few guests chuckled nervously. They could sense something was coming, but nobody moved to stop it. "I was just wondering," the young man continued, his voice dripping with false politeness. "Do you actually know how to play? Or do you just like touching expensive things?" More laughter now, louder this time. Rosa felt heat rising to her face. Her hands, still holding the polishing cloth, began to shake. "I should get back to work," she said quietly, turning to leave. No, wait." The young man stepped in front of her, blocking her path. "I'm serious. You've been working here for what, 10 years? 15? You must have picked up something. Why don't you play us a little song?" His friends pulled out their phones. The young woman in the group was already recording, her face lit up with cruel amusement. "Come on," the young man pressed. "Just a few notes. Show us what the cleaning lady can do." Rosa stood frozen. The room had grown quiet now. Dozens of eyes were fixed on her, waiting to see what would happen. Some people looked uncomfortable, but nobody spoke up. Nobody told the young man to stop. The head of the music department, Dr. Saunders, stood near the back of the crowd. She was a serious woman in her 60s who had dedicated her life to music education. She watched the scene unfold with a frown on her face, but she did not intervene. The young man's father was too important, too powerful. Making a scene would cause problems, so she stayed silent, like everyone else. Rosa could feel her heart pounding in her chest. Memories flooded through her mind. Her father's hands on the piano keys. The sound of applause in Havana. The smell of the sea coming through open windows while she practiced for hours. And then, other memories. Darker ones. The night they fled. Her father's face as he grew weaker. The day she decided to never play again. She had kept that promise for 30 years. 30 years of silence. 30 years of hiding who she really was. "I don't play," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm sorry." The young man laughed. "Of course you don't. I didn't think so." He turned to his friends with a triumphant smirk. "Can you imagine? A cleaning lady playing at Hartwell? That would be something." The crowd laughed along with him. Rosa felt tears burning behind her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She would not give him that satisfaction. She tried to walk away again, but the young man was not finished. "Hold on," he said, grabbing her arm lightly. "At least sit down at the piano for a picture. Come on, it'll be hilarious. The cleaning lady at the Steinway. My friends online will love it." Something inside Rosa cracked. It was not anger, exactly. It was something older and deeper. Something that had been buried for 3 decades, under layers of grief and loss and quiet acceptance. She looked at the young man's hand on her arm. Then she looked at his face, at his mocking smile, at the phones pointed in her direction, and she thought about her father. She thought about how he had died without ever playing again, how he had lost everything he loved and never got it back, how she had promised herself she would survive, no matter what, even if it meant giving up the thing that made her feel most alive. But what kind of survival was this? Hiding, shrinking, letting people like this young man treat her like she was nothing? Her father would not have wanted this for her. He had always told her that music was a gift, and gifts were meant to be shared. Rosa gently pulled her arm free from the young man's grip. "Okay," she said quietly. The young man blinked, surprised. "Wait. Really?" "Yes." Rosa walked slowly toward the piano bench. "I will play." Laughter rippled through the crowd again. This was even better than they had expected. The cleaning lady was actually going to try to play the piano. The phones stayed raised, ready to capture every embarrassing moment. Rosa sat down at the bench. She placed her hands in her lap and looked at the keys. The piano gleamed under the chandelier light, beautiful and waiting. For a moment, everything was still. The crowd watched with amused anticipation. The young man grinned at his friends, already imagining how many views this video would get. Nobody in that room knew what was about to happen. Nobody knew that they were about to witness something they would remember for the rest of their lives. Rosa closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and lifted her hands to the keys. The first note Rosa played was soft, so soft that the people at the back of the room could barely hear it. It hung in the air like a question, fragile and uncertain. A few guests snickered. Someone whispered, "Here we go." The young man who had started all of this crossed his arms and smiled. His phone was recording. His friends were recording. This was going to be perfect content for his social media. Rosa kept her eyes closed. Her fingers rested on the keys, trembling slightly. For a moment, it seemed like she might stop, like she might stand up, apologize, and go back to being invisible. But then something shifted. Her left hand moved down the keyboard and found a bass note. Deep and rich, it rumbled through the piano like distant thunder. Then her right hand answered with a melody that climbed upward, delicate as morning light. The snickering stopped. Rosa was playing the opening of Chopin's Ballade. No, 1-inch G minor. It was one of the most difficult and beautiful pieces ever written for piano. Conservatory students spent years trying to master it. Professional pianists built entire careers around performing it, and this cleaning lady in a faded blue uniform was playing it like she had been born with the music already inside her. The notes came slowly at first, almost careful, like someone testing water before diving in. But with each passing measure, Rosa grew bolder. Her fingers remembered what her mind had tried to forget. Muscle memory that had been sleeping for 30 years began to wake up. The melody swelled. It danced and wept and whispered secrets. It told stories of loss and longing, of hope and heartbreak. The guests who had been laughing moments ago now stood completely still. Their champagne glasses hung frozen in midair. Their conversations died in their throats. The young man's smile faded. He lowered his phone without realizing he was doing it. His friends exchanged confused glances. This was not what they had expected. This was not what anyone had expected. Dr. Saunders, the head of the music department, pushed her way toward the front of the crowd. Her face had gone pale. She had spent her entire life surrounded by talented musicians. She had heard countless performances by gifted students and famous artists. But this was different. This was not just technical skill. This was not just years of practice. This was something rare and precious. Something that could not be taught or bought or faked. This was a true artist. Rosa played on, oblivious to the stunned faces around her. In her mind, she was no longer in Boston. She was back in Havana. Sitting at her father's old piano in their small apartment, she could smell the salt air coming through the window. She could hear her mother humming in the kitchen. She could feel her father's hand on her shoulder, warm and proud. The music built toward its first climax, a cascade of notes that tumbled over each other like waves crashing against rocks. Rosa's hands flew across the keyboard with a speed and precision that seemed almost impossible. A woman in the crowd gasped. Another pressed her hand to her heart. The young man who had mocked Rosa stood frozen in place. His face had changed completely. The arrogance was gone, replaced by something that looked almost like fear. He was watching something he could not understand, something that made him feel very small. The piece moved into its quieter middle section, and Rosa let the tempo slow. The notes became tender now, gentle as a lullaby. They spoke of memories and dreams, of things lost but not forgotten. An older gentleman near the front of the crowd removed his glasses and wiped his eyes. He was a retired judge who had not cried in 20 years. But something about this music reached past all his defenses and touched the softest part of his heart. He was not the only one. Throughout the room, people were experiencing the same thing. The music was doing something to them, opening doors they had kept locked, stirring feelings they had tried to bury. A woman thought about her mother, who had passed away last spring. A man remembered his childhood home, now demolished and gone forever. A young student thought about all the times she had doubted herself, all the dreams she had been too afraid to chase. This was the power of real music. Not notes on a page, not technical exercises, but human emotion, translated into sound and set free into the world. Rosa reached the stormy final section of the piece. Her fingers attacked the keys with fierce intensity. The piano seemed to cry out, its voice filling every corner of the hall. This was not a performance anymore. This was a confession. 30 years of silence. 30 years of hiding. 30 years of pretending to be nobody. All of it came pouring out through her hands. She played for her father, who had died with music still trapped inside him. She played for her mother, who had worked herself to exhaustion so Rosa could have a better life. She played for the young girl she had once been, full of dreams and talent and hope. And she played for herself, for the woman she had become, for all the nights she had polished pianos she was not allowed to play, for all the time she had been invisible, for all the years she had kept her gift locked away like something shameful. The final notes approached. Rosa built toward the climax with everything she had. The music swelled until it seemed like the walls themselves might burst. Every person in the room held their breath, and then, with one last thundering chord, it was over. Silence. Complete and absolute silence. Rosa sat at the piano with her hands still on the keys. Her chest rose and fell with heavy breaths. Her eyes remained closed. She was afraid to open them. Afraid to see the faces around her. Afraid that maybe she had only imagined the past few minutes. That maybe she had played badly, and everyone was staring at her with pity or disgust. The silence stretched on. 1 second. 2 seconds. 3. Then a single pair of hands began to clap. Rosa opened her eyes and turned toward the sound. It was an old woman standing near the back of the room. She was clapping slowly, tears streaming down her wrinkled cheeks. Another person joined in, then another, then 10 more. Within seconds, the entire room exploded into applause. People rose from their chairs. They stood at their tables. They clapped until their hands hurt. Some of them were crying openly. Others were shaking their heads in disbelief. The young man who had forced Rosa to play stood motionless among the standing crowd. His phone had slipped from his hand and lay forgotten on the floor. His face was pale, his expression unreadable. He looked like someone who had just witnessed something that changed the way he saw the world. Dr. Saunders pushed through the crowd toward the piano. Her professional composure had completely disappeared. She looked like a child who had just seen magic for the first time. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice breaking. "Where did you learn to play like that?" Rosa looked at her with tired eyes. For a moment, she did not answer. She was still half lost in the music, half trapped in memories of another life. But the applause continued. It washed over her like warm water, like sunlight after a long winter. For the first time in 30 years, she felt seen, not as a cleaning lady, not as nobody, but as herself, as Rosa. She took a shaky breath and prepared to answer Dr. Saunders' question. But before she could speak, something else happened. Something that would take this moment and turn it into something even bigger. Something that Rosa never could have planned or predicted. The room was about to learn not just that she could play, but who she really was and where she came from. And that truth would change everything. The applause slowly faded, but the energy in the room remained electric. People whispered to each other, pointing at Rosa, trying to make sense of what they had just witnessed. Dr. Saunders stood in front of the piano, her eyes still wet with tears. She asked again, more gently this time. "Please, tell me who you are. Where did you study?" Rosa looked down at her hands. These hands that had scrubbed floors and cleaned toilets for 12 years. These hands that had once made concert halls in Havana rise to their feet. She took a deep breath. "My name is Rosa Maria Delgado," she said quietly. "I studied at the National Conservatory in Havana. My teacher was Maestro Alejandro Reyes." A sharp gasp cut through the room. It came from an elderly man standing near one of the tables. He was thin and elegant, with silver hair and a neatly trimmed beard. His name was Professor Werner Klein, a retired pianist from Germany who now served on the conservatory's board of directors. He stepped forward, his face pale with shock. "Alejandro Reyes?" he repeated. "The Alejandro Reyes? The one who trained Victoria Fernandez and Carlos Mendez?" Rosa nodded slowly. "Yes, the same." Professor Klein pressed a hand to his forehead. He looked like he might faint. "I knew Alejandro. We studied together in Vienna 50 years ago. He was a genius. A true master." He stared at Rosa with new eyes. "You were his student." "I was." Rosa's voice grew stronger now. "I was his last student before he passed away. He died in 1989, 3 years after I left Cuba." The room had gone completely silent again. Everyone was listening, trying to understand. Dr. Saunders shook her head slowly. "But how is this possible? How did you end up here, working as a—" She stopped herself, suddenly embarrassed. "A cleaning lady?" Rosa finished the sentence for her. There was no bitterness in her voice, just truth. "It is a long story." And so, standing beside the piano that had just revealed her secret, Rosa told her story. She told them about growing up in Havana with music in every corner of her home. About her father, who had been one of Cuba's greatest pianists until politics destroyed his career. About the night her family fled with nothing but the clothes on their backs. She told them about arriving in America with no money, no connections, no way to prove who she was or what she could do. About watching her father grow sick and fade away, broken by the loss of everything he loved. She told them about the day she decided to stop playing, about how every note reminded her of too much pain, about how she buried her gift deep inside herself and tried to forget it ever existed. "I thought I could survive without music," she said quietly. "I thought I could be someone else, a normal person with a normal life." She looked around the grand hall, at the chandeliers and the flowers and the wealthy guests in their expensive clothes. "But you cannot run from who you are. The music was always there, waiting. I just did not have the courage to let it out." When she finished speaking, nobody moved. The story hung in the air like the final note of a symphony. Then Professor Klein did something unexpected. He walked up to Rosa, took her rough, work-worn hand in both of his, and bowed his head. "It is an honor," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "A true honor to meet a student of Alejandro Reyes. He would be so proud of you." Rosa felt tears spill down her cheeks. She had not cried in years. She had trained herself not to. But now, standing in this room full of strangers who finally saw her, she could not hold it back anymore. Dr. Saunders stepped forward and put a gentle hand on Rosa's shoulder. "Why didn't you ever tell anyone? All these years, working here, surrounded by music. Why did you stay silent?" Rosa wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "Who would have believed me? I am just a cleaning lady. I have no certificates, no recordings, nothing to prove my past. And even if I did, what difference would it make? I am 53 years old. My time has passed. No. Dr. Saunders shook her head firmly. Your time has not passed. What you just played, that was not the music of someone whose time has passed. That was the music of someone who has been waiting for the right moment. From the back of the room, someone started clapping again. Others joined in. Soon the whole hall was applauding once more. Not just for the performance, but for Rosa herself. For her story. For her survival. But not everyone was celebrating. The young man who had started all of this stood apart from the crowd. His friends had drifted away from him, embarrassed to be associated with what he had done. He stood alone, his face pale, his eyes fixed on the floor. He had wanted to humiliate a cleaning lady for a few laughs and some viral content. Instead, he had accidentally uncovered something beautiful, something that made his cruelty look even uglier by comparison. People were already whispering about him, pointing, shaking their heads. His father, a powerful businessman who had donated millions to the conservatory, stood across the room with his arms crossed and his jaw tight. He did not look pleased. The young man felt something he had rarely felt before in his privileged life: shame. One of the guests, a woman who worked as a reporter for the local news station, had recorded Rosa's entire performance on her phone. She was already typing out a message to her editor. This story was too good to keep quiet. A Cuban refugee, a piano prodigy, working as a cleaning lady for 12 years at one of the most prestigious music schools in the country. It had everything. By the next morning, the video would be online. By the afternoon, it would have 100,000 views. By the end of the week, it would be seen by millions of people around the world. But Rosa did not know any of this yet. She was still standing by the piano, overwhelmed by the attention, unsure of what to do next. Dr. Saunders took charge. She guided Rosa to a quiet corner of the room, away from the crowd. She brought her a glass of water and a chair. I want you to come to my office tomorrow, she said. We need to talk about your future. Rosa shook her head. I have to work tomorrow. I cannot miss my shift. Dr. Saunders smiled gently. Rosa, after tonight, I don't think you'll be cleaning floors anymore. Not if I have anything to say about it. For the first time in many years, Rosa allowed herself to feel something she had almost forgotten: hope. Later that night, after the gala had ended and the guests had gone home, Rosa walked through the empty halls of the conservatory one last time. Her footsteps echoed in the silence, just like they had on 1,000 other nights. But everything felt different now. She stopped in front of the grand piano. It sat on the stage, gleaming under the dim lights. Beautiful and patient, Rosa sat down on the bench. She placed her fingers on the keys. This time, she did not hesitate. She did not worry about who might hear or what they might think. She simply played. She played a piece she had written herself, many years ago, for her father. A Cuban melody filled with sunshine and sadness, with the sound of the sea and the smell of tropical flowers. She had never performed it for anyone. It had always been too personal, too painful. But now, in the empty hall, she let it pour out of her. Every note was a prayer. Every phrase was a memory. When she finished, she sat in silence for a long moment. Then she whispered into the darkness, I am ready now, Papa. I am finally ready. She did not know exactly what the future held. But for the first time in 30 years, she was not afraid to find out. Rosa woke up the next morning in her small apartment, just like she had every day for the past 8 years. The sun came through the thin curtains. The radiator clicked and hummed. Everything looked the same, but everything had changed. Her phone, an old model she mostly used for alarm clocks and occasional calls, was buzzing on the nightstand. She picked it up and saw dozens of missed calls from numbers she did not recognize. Her voicemail was full. She had more text messages than she had received in the past 5 years combined. She did not understand what was happening until she turned on her small television and saw her own face on the morning news. The reporter was a young woman with perfect hair and a bright smile. She was talking excitedly about a video that had gone viral overnight. The headline at the bottom of the screen read, Cleaning Lady Stuns Crowd with world-class piano performance. Rosa sat down slowly on the edge of her bed. Her hands were shaking. The news showed clips from the video. There she was, in her faded blue uniform, sitting at the grand piano. There was the moment the music began. There were the faces of the crowd, shifting from amusement to shock to tears. The video had been uploaded to the internet late last night by the reporter who had been at the gala. By morning, it had over 2 million views. By noon, it would have 10 million. By the end of the week, it would be one of the most watched videos of the year. Rosa's phone rang again. This time, she answered. It was Dr. Saunders from the conservatory. Her voice was breathless with excitement. Rosa, have you seen the news? Have you been online? Everyone is talking about you. I have had calls from newspapers, television stations, even concert halls asking about you. This is incredible. Rosa did not know what to say. She had spent 30 years being invisible. Now, suddenly, the whole world could see her. The days that followed were a blur. Television crews showed up at her apartment building. Reporters waited outside the conservatory. Her story was everywhere. In every language. In every country, people shared the video with their friends and families. They wrote comments about how it made them cry. They called Rosa an inspiration, a symbol of hidden talent, a reminder that you should never judge anyone by their appearance. Letters began arriving at the conservatory addressed to her. Hundreds of them, then thousands. People wrote to tell her how her story had touched them. A woman in Brazil said she had started taking piano lessons again after watching the video. A man in Japan said he had finally found the courage to pursue his dream of becoming a painter. A teenager in England said Rosa had given her hope during the darkest time of her life. Rosa read every single letter. Each one felt like a small miracle. Dr. Saunders kept her promise. She offered Rosa a position at the conservatory, not as a cleaning lady, but as a teacher and performer in residence. Rosa would have her own studio. She would give lessons to students. She would perform at school events and concerts. It was more than Rosa had ever dared to dream. But the biggest surprise came 3 months later, when a letter arrived with an elegant letterhead. It was from Carnegie Hall in New York City, one of the most famous concert venues in the world. They were inviting Rosa to perform. She read the letter 5 times before she believed it was real. Carnegie Hall, the place where the greatest musicians in history had played, the place her father had always dreamed of seeing. On the night of the concert, Rosa stood backstage and tried to calm her breathing. She was wearing a beautiful black gown that had been specially made for her. Her hair, usually tied back in a simple bun, had been styled by professionals. She looked like a different person, but inside, she was still the same Rosa. The girl from Havana. The daughter of a broken pianist. The woman who had cleaned floors and polished pianos in silence for 12 years. A young stagehand approached her with a nervous smile. 5 minutes, ma'am. The hall is completely full. There is not an empty seat. Rosa nodded. Her heart was pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. She thought about her father. She wished he could be here. She wished he could see what had happened, how his music had survived through her, how his dream was finally coming true even though he was not alive to witness it. But maybe he was watching. Maybe, somewhere, he knew. The stagehand returned. It's time. Rosa walked out onto the stage. The audience stretched out before her like an ocean of faces, thousands of people, dressed in their finest clothes, all looking at her. The applause that greeted her was deafening. It rolled through the hall like thunder. Rosa made her way to the piano. It was a beautiful instrument, even grander than the one at Hartwell. She sat down on the bench and adjusted her position. The applause faded. Silence filled the hall. Rosa looked out at the audience one more time. And there, in the 5th row, she saw a familiar face. It was the young man from the gala. The one who had mocked her. The one who had forced her to play as a joke. He was sitting quietly, his hands folded in his lap. When their eyes met, he did not look away. Instead, he nodded slowly. A small gesture of acknowledgement. Rosa had learned his story in the months since the gala. After the video went viral, He had faced intense criticism online. People called him cruel and entitled. His father, embarrassed by the negative attention, had cut off his allowance and forced him to get a job. But something else had happened too. The young man had started volunteering at a community center that offered free music lessons to children from poor families. He showed up every week, helping to set up chairs and organize sheet music. He never asked for credit or attention. He just quietly did the work. Last month, he had sent Rosa a letter. It was short and handwritten. "I am sorry," it said. "I was wrong. Thank you for showing me what real music looks like. I will spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of what I witnessed that night." Rosa had kept the letter. She believed in second chances. She believed people could change. After all, she was living proof that it was never too late to become who you were meant to be. She placed her fingers on the keys. Tonight, she would play Chopin again. She would play pieces by Cuban composers that most of this audience had never heard, and she would end with the melody she had written for her father all those years ago. The one she had played alone in the empty hall on the night everything changed. But before she began, she leaned toward the microphone and spoke softly. "I dedicate this performance to everyone who has ever been made to feel invisible. To everyone who has been told they are not good enough. To everyone who has a gift inside them that the world has not yet seen." She paused. "Your time will come. Do not give up." Then she began to play. The music filled Carnegie Hall, rising up to the ceiling and spreading out into the night. It was beautiful and sad and hopeful all at once. It told the story of a life filled with loss and love, with silence and song. In the audience, people wept. They held each other's hands. They felt something stirring inside them, something they had forgotten they possessed. And Rosa played on, her eyes closed, her heart open, finally free. She was no longer invisible. She was exactly who she was always meant to be.